Welcome, all Canadian citizens for charter rights and freedoms. Hello to all C3RF members across the nation. It's with great pleasure I give you another in-hot session. On this particular session, we're going to be rolling in hot on the subject of the charter at age 40 years old. More specifically, though, we'll be taking a look at just what is going on with the charter after 40 years, and particularly after 2+ years of COVID-19 pandemic measures, we seem to have a situation where the charter is in tatters. And today we have a very special guest who is an expert when it comes to discussing the charter and just what's going on. And that's none other than the Honourable Brian Peckford. Brian, I'm doubly honored to say, is also an honorary patron of C3RF. So it is great to have him on board with us today. And just by way of introduction, I'm going to share a screen here, and this is up on our own C3RF pages, but we have a little bit of history on Brian. He is, of course, is the former Premier of Newfoundland and Labrador, 1979 to 1989, very formative years in that province's history. Now, very importantly for us, he helped to write the Charter of Rights and Freedoms, and he is the last surviving First Minister involved with not only drafting and defining the document, but patriating it back to Canada in 1982. His bio goes on there, and I invite you all to take a look at it, but our time is short with Brian today. So I want to get right into the topic. And first off, Brian, we talked a number of months ago, and at that time, we talked before the Freedom Convoy 2022, before that all happened, and we talked about what was going on with pandemic measures, and you were involved in standing up an initiative called Lawyers Stand Up, and that initiative, it incorporated what was called the Peckford recommendation, and it spoke to getting a provincial premier to provide a direct reference on the implication of pandemic measures, respecting the charter directly to the highest court of that province. And I want to ask you now, what is the status of that particular initiative? Is that still ongoing? What is happening?
Well, unfortunately, none of the premiers got back to me. They just acknowledged me electronically. Some of them did, not all of them. And so they've just ignored their responsibilities to answer a question from a citizen, let alone a former First Minister who's been involved in the Charter. So they've been very arrogant and very unresponsive in dealing with the issue as to why won't they refer their mandates, their COVID mandates to their highest court to get a constitutional adjudication. If they have nothing to hide, one would think that they would jump at the chance to do this, but none of them have. And so it's just lying there languishing because none of the First Ministers have responded. Some of them haven't even responded to me at all. The others have responded to me in an electronic acknowledgement, and that's it. And so, wow. That's, I guess it speaks to the state of our democracy that a citizen of Canada can't even get an answer to a pretty civil question. Why won't you refer your COVID measures to your highest court, which you have the power to do? I might follow up by saying I have started another initiative in the last few days whereby I've asked all the First Ministers again and communicated to them already, all 13 of them, the 3 territorial leaders, as well as the 10 premiers and the Prime Minister, whether they would agree to call come together and call for a national inquiry into the mandates for the last 2 years to see whether they were necessary and to see whether they were constitutional.
Yes.
Of course, that's about 48 hours old. And like the previous reference to all the premiers and all the First Ministers, I've heard electronically from 5 out of the 13, 14 really, 5 out of the 14, and that's only been an electronic acknowledgement that they received it, not answering the question that was asked. Wow. So this just gives you an idea of the state of our democracy, and it's a very sad situation that we find ourselves in when you can't get an answer to a question from the First Minister of this nation.
It's absolutely incredible. I can't. I just don't know what to say about that, because we're talking about a Canada that's premised on the belief that it is strong and free. And you would think that freedom is a basic principle of our democracy, and that people would be would be striving to talk about it, to make sure that there's no misunderstandings, that we're not on the wrong track. And I like your idea of a national inquiry, and I think that is something that is absolutely required, because we're looking at a situation where there are so many things that have impacted our charter rights and freedoms. We can talk about a medical system that is so fragile that we have to give up our charter rights and freedoms to protect it. I mean,
Yeah.
I think it's supposed to be the other way around. I think the medical system is supposed to protect us and not us it. But all these things seem to be upside down. Things have been turned on their head, type of thing. And now I understand that the premiers, don't even want to talk to you about it. The last living first minister responsible for patriating the charter. It's incredible. Absolutely.
Yeah, no, I don't know what has happened to the seems like the majority in Canada, who seem to become immune to talk about immunity and medical things. They seem to be immune to understanding what's happening to our nation. There's a strong group of people who read my blog every day and who follow things that you are doing and other organizations like yours, and that. But there's a strong group of people who a long time ago made up their minds, because they were in fear of the virus, only to find out that scientifically they shouldn't be fearful at all. But they have not changed. They have stood, frozen in time as to what their views are on certain things, and have not entertained other ideas and thoughts like mine or yours or other people. And in this particular case, it's extremely telling that here you have elected people, the top people in all the governments of Canada, the territories, the provinces, and the federal government, who will not answer a simple question provided to them by a former first minister. I mean, this is it will go down in history as something that,
Yes.
Canadians or people on this planet will look at this in the future and just say, did this really happen?
Yeah.
And so, I'm very saddened by all of that, and I keep fighting. And I know you're going to ask me questions about the charter, and I'll leave it to you to do that, because I think we need to talk about the charter and where it is at the present moment.
Yeah, I think you're right. I think this is historical, and I think people are going to look back on this, and I think people are going to see whether they're on the right side of history or not. And I really believe that you are, and as you say, an historical turn of events. I'm going to share the screen once more here. I also wanted to show the Peckford recommendation. This is your organization, Stand With Us, that you're participating with for the Peckford recommendation. You say that's kind of gone the way of the buffalo, I guess, because there's no political interest in it from premiers of all 13 provinces and territories. Absolutely incredible. The next thing I wanted to talk about was Freedom Convoy 2022. And I put up this slide here to show that you are an active participant in Freedom Convoy 2022. You're a guest speaker there, and you look at the speakers list there, and it's just a fantastic list of experts and speakers. First off, I wanted to ask you, because you went there, and before you went there, the Prime Minister of the land was calling truckers and people who supported them misogynist. You were racist. You're a fringe minority. I mean, what did you think did you think twice about going to to be a guest speaker after being called all those nasty names?
No, I wasn't at all, because I knew I was lucky enough that when I launched my lawsuit against the federal government, the Justice Center for Constitutional Freedoms, their own lawyers, and then they hired an outside lawyer by the name of Keith Wilson.
Yes.
And he also became the lawyer for the Truckers Convoy. And I knew that the Truckers Convoy were being well organized, legally established, that they had a board, that they had an accountant, that everything was being done the way it should be done. Mm-hmm. And they were very much organized and legitimate. They were not some fringe group. They were an extremely legitimate legal entity that were involved in what we all thought was civil disobedience. They were, abiding by the law, but protesting actions that were being taken by the various governments of Canada by going to the national capital, which is their right to do. And when I got there, having that kind of background and knowing that they were quite legal and that what they were doing was quite right, I then walked the streets of Ottawa in the areas where the truckers were. And of course, it was peaceful. The truckers were helping people on the streets, providing food, not only to themselves, but others who passed by, helping out wherever they could. And the other thing that was quite startling that still has not gotten a lot of attention is that they were in touch with the police force of Ottawa, the city police, on an ongoing basis, almost on an hourly basis, on a daily basis, with their lawyer and my lawyer, Keith Wilson, and other lawyers who were with Keith at the time in Ottawa. And so this ongoing dialogue with the police to ensure that what they were doing was consistent with what the police saw as necessary to keep order, and good government. And they did. And they had, a whole bunch of meetings every day. And of course, the truckers were quite willing to move the trucks according to how the police wanted them to ensure the free flow of activity within the capital. And this was happening on an ongoing basis. So, and it's, of course, that's all been proven now since. And all these allegations about foreign money have been denied by the authorities, by FinTech and others.
Yes.
Totally denied. And the whole question of violence and stuff, there's been no charge brought against any of the truckers as relates to having weapons or doing violent behavior. I mean, the most that they can get is sort of a mischief charge and the like.
Yes.
So, and then I walked the streets one night myself after the speech and before I went to bed, sort of thing, at 9:30, 10 o'clock at night, of course, being dark then, and walked the streets. And I mean, it was complete and utter silence. I mean, it was just beautiful to see. There were still a few truckers out with their barbecues or serving hot chocolate, which we availed of at the time. But it was amazing, and anybody who was there for any length of time could see what I saw with their own eyes. And so this is going to go down as a real blight on the history of our country as it relates to the response that the government gave. Because, and the other thing was, they were asking for a meeting with the government of Canada all through this period, as well as meeting with the city police of Ottawa. They were asking for a meeting with the government of Canada, and the government of Canada turned them down.
Yes.
And it was after that that the Emergency Act was brought in. So there was no basis whatsoever for what was happening in Ottawa and responding with the Emergencies Act. And even at the border, as we all know, by the time the Emergencies Act was put in place, there was free flow of goods and services on the border.
Yeah, the borders were, the blockades were disassembled. Yeah.
Yeah. So my experience there and giving a speech there and then being part of the press conference, anticipating the Emergency Act coming down, was all, in some cases, surreal, because here we were at this press conference because we had gotten word that the Emergency Act was going to be invoked by the Prime Minister. And we sort of beat him to the punch and had a press release. But it was all surreal to see the press in the room. And as I was trying to talk and finished, and Tamara, the leader of the truck convoy, in her speech, we never had to, we never stopped speaking. And they were jumping on us with all kinds of provocative, unprepared questions, just trying to discredit everything that we had said. And we had to disband the press conference because it became bedlam there, because they were being so nasty to these people who were just trying to explain why we were going to oppose that Emergency Act that was coming down. And so,
it seems, sorry, but it really seemed like there was a narrative there that the government and the media, in cahoots with each other, were desperate to preserve. There was a narrative that this was a fringe minority. These were bad people. They had foreign funding, and there was even mention. Lamati, the Attorney General, even mentioned the fact that there was some pro-Trump people
Yes.
giving money.
Yes.
It was just absolutely incredible. But what I thought happened, this is my personal opinion, and I'm writing a blog on it that's going out tomorrow morning, as a matter of fact. It talks about the first domino to fall. I think that Freedom Convoy 2022 was the first domino to fall to break that narrative, because I don't think anybody foresaw what was going to happen, that this would receive so much public support that it would go worldwide. And it
Yeah.
went all over the world. It was New Zealand, it was Germany, it was Switzerland, it was everywhere. And people started to say and see that maybe this narrative that the government has given us isn't quite true, because I'm looking at these pictures and I'm seeing kids on bouncy castles, and I'm seeing people picking up garbage, and I'm seeing people give food to the homeless, and they're telling me that these are bad people. I think that was the first domino to fall.
Yeah, I'm still surprised to see how many Canadians still support the government and what they did during that truck convoy. I'm absolutely astounded by it, because the facts just don't bear it out. And now, since that time, we know for sure, from independent sources, if you classify you and me as being not independent, but the independent sources have since verified our impressions of what happened there. And being there personally myself, I could see with my own eyes. So yeah, hopefully more and more people will begin to realize what happened, and that this was wrong and unconstitutional, and continues to be so, as does the federal travel mandate and other kinds of things that they're doing right to this very hour.
Yeah, I think even in testimony given after the fact about the declaration of the Emergency Act, number 2 man in FinTrack, man by the name of McKillop, he said there was no foreign funding here. These were just normal people who were caught up and believed in a cause, and they wanted to give 10, 20 bucks to the cause. That's all it was. Yep. So the whole thing is caving in on itself. Is what happened. It was the first domino to fall. But now I'd like to go on to go screen share again. And now we're talking about a new initiative, and I'm throwing this up here. This is Justice Center for Constitutional Freedoms posting, and they talk about going to take the federal government to court on the issue of travel mandates, federal travel mandates, and you are one of the applicants in that case. So we talk about this case kind of is directly connected to the Freedom Convoy 2022, which was all about getting rid of travel mandates, vaccine mandates for truckers going across the border. You're on the lookout. Your suit claims that the federal vaccine mandates required for Canadians to get on an airplane and go someplace is completely unconstitutional. Can you speak to that initiative? How do you see this unfolding?
Well, it's very, very interesting. There's a lot of interest in it, and a lot of people are asking me every day on my blog, and I try to keep them updated on what's happening. It was submitted on, I think, the last part of January 28th or 30th. Anyway, it has been submitted, and it has been accepted, and both sides have now identified the legal people who are going to be involved, and the court action is proceeding along the lines of the case management. In other words, both sides are submitting their documentation, and both sides have an opportunity to cross-examine the other's documentation, and that's where we are today. So it's very active, it's in the court, and it's being prosecuted, if you will, or it's been conducted, it's underway in an active way by both sides on the case. The federal government has identified their people, and they've increased the number of people that they have on the case just in the last little while. And so the schedule that was set up to hear and allow for this cross-examination to occur has been extended by another 2 weeks now, because there's been more people added by the federal government to the case. So it looks like they're taking it very seriously now.
Yep.
And there are other people involved with me in it who have examples of how the federal mandate is negatively affecting their lives and their businesses and so on.
Tremendous.
And Mr. Bernier, the leader of the People's Party of Canada, is also involved in the same kind of case. And so that's all coming together, to be sort of one case, one big case on the travel management on the side. So it is very active. It's moving right ahead. All of that case management stuff should be completed with all the cross-examination done by the end of July.
Yes.
And we're still anticipating that there will be the public part of the hearing, a 4-day hearing, by September of this year. So we're hoping to have the case, all of this work done, and the hearing heard, and the judge hearing it being over by the end of September or early October, which would mean then the judge would be, or judges will be left to adjudicate and make a decision, hopefully by the end of this year.
Yeah, I like what you've done here, because what you've done is you've kind of done an end run around all the provincial courts, because you've taken a federal travel mandate and gone directly to federal court. So subsequent to these proceedings, then the next step would, I guess, would be the Supreme Court, and then we'd have a final resolution.
Yeah, exactly. That's one of the reasons why we chose the federal mandate as opposed to a provincial mandate. But these should continue too, of course, and they are continuing. As a matter of fact, we'll come to them in the state of the charter, because I want a very interesting thing happened yesterday in the Queen's Bench of Alberta, which bears directly on the charter. Everybody talks about the charter is dead, the charter is no good, but we'll come to that in a second. But just to finish off on my federal, on my lawsuit, yes, it is an action against a federal mandate, which meant it went directly to the Federal Court of Canada and then the Supreme Court of Canada. And so those who've gone to the provincial courts, you have 2 steps to go: the trial division of the Supreme Court of the province, then the Court of Appeal of the province, and then the Supreme Court of Canada. So it's a bit longer process than mine. That's one reason we chose this. But the other reason why we chose this, which I think Canadians should be aware of, if they are not already aware of it, is that the travel mandate per se is something that every Canadian clearly understands, because they either have a family member, right, in some other part of Canada, they either have a business in some other part of Canada. That travel in Canada is what made Canada. When the railway went west, that opened up the country, and then the provinces of Manitoba and Saskatchewan and Alberta and British Columbia came on board, if you will, to be provinces of Canada. It was through travel. It was through travel and the rivers of Canada that the early explorers came and traveled the rivers of Canada. The First Nations, that was their livelihood, was the rivers of Canada. And so the whole issue of travel is germane to and relevant to every single Canadian. They can immediately identify with this. You are being, as a Canadian, restricted from traveling in your own country. Yes. My, oh my, oh my. And so I think taking this federal travel mandate is something that every Canadian could associate and relate to very easily. That was the other reason why we did it. And of course, if in fact we are successful, it will have impact on the other mandates that are out there, because we're bringing science to the table, as well as that it violates the Charter's Section 6 mobility rights.
Yep.
So we're going full bore on this. And Canadians should know that it makes no difference if this mandate comes off tomorrow. They've still violated the Constitution and must be brought to heel for the violation. The violation still happened, no matter if they took out the mandate tomorrow. So we're going to pursue this right through to the Supreme Court of Canada if necessary. And there will be no stop on this until we finally get the final adjudication.
Okay. I just like to share screen again here, because as you say, this is going to go much more rapidly than say other cases that are going through provincial jurisdictions. And I think there you have a schedule. Look, we're looking at the fall of 2022 for a proposed timeline hearing. And now if I go to the next screen share, this is your actual application, Brian.
Right.
And I'll just go up to the top here just to let people see. This is the federal court application. And I go down to section 19 here. And when you talk about things like evidence and science, your application says 4 vaccines are currently authorized. All COVID vaccines are still undergoing clinical trials, which are scheduled for completion 2023. I've seen some estimations 2024. None of these vaccines, here we go, prevent the infection or transmission of COVID. So how could anybody justify keeping the non-vaccinated off of an airplane if a vaccinated person is just as likely to transmit the disease? This is absolutely incredible. I can't see why you even have to go to court, because this evidence is already out there. Everybody
Yep.
knows about this now. So there should be no need for a court venue at all. But I think getting back to, the premiers, they didn't answer you. The territorial premiers didn't answer you. No one wants to talk about it. I'm wondering if the whole thing that's going on here is we're operating in a theater of fear. Everybody is afraid, and it seems to me that the government is doing the best it can, the press is doing the best it can to keep that fear level up, to keep everybody traumatized. So you
Yes.
don't want to ask questions. You don't want to be
Right.
seen to be against the grain.
Yes, I don't think there's any question about that. And in the little area that I live in here on Vancouver Island in the city of Parksville, I mean, I can see it every day. People don't even want to talk about it, right? And the fear that was there a year and a half, 2 years ago is still there today.
Yeah.
And I think they're afraid that they may be wrong right now. But I got to say something that's interesting. I had a friend of mine just do an analysis of the latest data out of British Columbia, out of their Center of Disease Control and so on. And I posted on my blog, and it's gotten a lot of coverage. He's a mathematician by trade, a teacher, retired, and he did a wonderful analysis of it. But one of the things that it really showed is that up to about a month, 2 months ago, 14% of the British Columbians were not vaccinated.
Yes.
And guess what? That's remained true to this day. There seems to be now a feeling that no, we've got so much information now, and that's very strong. That 14%, it hasn't moved down to less than 14%. And so I think there's starting to be a realization, right, that there's something very, very wrong here, and that the other thing is that as we come to it as it relates to the charter, there's some interesting things happening there as well.
Yeah, I think I've also seen evidence indicating that when it comes to boosters, that they've kind of plateaued out as well. People don't seem to want to go for number 3, number 4, number 5.
No, I think we're down to like 56% in British Columbia that have got that third or fourth booster, because it doesn't last any time at all. And you don't know what damage or injury it's going to do to you long term. So, I think it's very gradual, but I think it's happening. And those people who are now refusing these boosters are saying nothing.
Yes,
they're not coming up and saying, I didn't get the booster, but the numbers speak for themselves.
So I think we're at kind of a inflection point here where it's starting to go the other way. People are starting to ask questions. And again, I think that first domino that fell was that Freedom Convoy 2022 that made that start to happen. Now, I'm getting a lot of feedback, Brian, from people, C3RF types who are interested in the charter. They're very disenchanted. They're saying, well, I had this idea of the charter. I think we all had the idea that we had fundamental freedoms that were guarantees and were rock solid, except for limitations that kind of made sense, I guess. But now they're starting to ask me, well, it doesn't look like the charter is working. What's wrong with the charter? And they're starting to ask, should we be doing something else? And I think their faith in the charter is starting to wander. And I wanted to talk to you a bit about that because I think you're the one person in Canada that really knows what the intent of the charter was. You were there. You helped draft it. Was it? I'm going to throw something at you, and I've been writing about this for some time now. Where I look at court decisions, and I see a lot of Supreme Court justices use a concept they call the living tree, and they say the living tree concept is, well, the charter isn't built on a foundation of rock. It kind of shifts. It moves around. It depends on the context of the times. And therefore, they use that context of the times excuse to allow themselves to wander away from principles I thought were sacrosanct. And when I look at sacrosanct principles, as far as I can see, the preamble in one sentence kind of says it all. That preamble should be guiding these judges, but it doesn't seem to do so. Could you talk about the living tree? What are the judges
Yeah.
doing? Why are they doing this?
Well, I think you're dead right, and you described it well, and this is what's happened. There's nothing in the Constitution which gives the judges the right to even entertain the living tree. This is the other thing that nobody's really talked about. Where is the authority to do what they're doing as it relates to the living tree? That suddenly they have decided that they can interpret, change really the wording of the Constitution without going back and doing it through the amending formula, because that's essentially what they're doing. They're violating the Constitution by what they're doing, because they're changing the Constitution without going through the rules that's set down by the Constitution itself.
Yeah.
But it's become very, very prominent in all the law schools across the nation. Various lawyers, by the way, have gotten hold of me since I've highlighted this living tree thing and said that it is wrong. It is completely wrong. If you want to amend the Constitution, there's a formula. It's not like we don't have an amending formula. We went from 1867 to 1982 without an amending formula. That's why we couldn't patriate the Constitution. Now we got one.
Yeah.
And the judges don't want to use it, or don't want to say it has, I have to rule according to what's written. If the political class want to change that, well, then there's an amending formula. And here is the amending formula that's in the Constitution Act of 1982. And so we're getting away from what was intended, what was meant, and what is written. Not only what was intended, but what was written. And so I think, but very importantly, yesterday, or the day before yesterday, the Alberta Queen's Bench Judge Romaine, in a decision over sort of procedure as to how, because they've been taken to court, the government of Alberta, over their mandates, okay? Mm-hmm. And the public health officer has been, Hinshaw has been a part of that, of course, because she was the public health officer delivering on what the cabinet and the government said they wanted to have done. Well, the government of Alberta, through her and through their lawyers, tried to prevent information from coming to the court and being used that was part of cabinet. Okay.
Cabinet confidentiality.
Talk to the public health officer. We want you to do this. Here's our cabinet order. You carry it out, and then discussions occurred about that data. Well, in a very important decision, and the judge referred to the charter. Now, the charter, therefore, is not dead. A judge in the Queen's Bench of Alberta yesterday referred to the charter, saying, in order for me to clearly decide on this case, I must have all of the information. That must be available to the court. And this does not violate the principle of cabinet secrecy, because cabinet secrecy has to do with discussion between ministers and the first minister, private conversations, not the data that came to cabinet, not the data that the public health officer was using from the cabinet.
Oh boy.
And so the judge ruled this data has to be part of this case, and ruled against cabinet secrecy. Now, and the judge said in it, use the word, the charter, in order for me to properly adjudicate relative to the breaches of the charter that are being alleged, I must have all the information, and it must be made available to this court. And so here you have it. Here you have it in black and white, in Technicolor, that the charter is very much alive, according to this judge, who's on the Queen's Bench of the Alberta court. And so it's very much alive. There was a case, by the way, in Newfoundland just recently, where the charter was involved, where the police went in to a house looking for drugs without a search warrant.
Yes.
Hadn't gone through the proper procedures. And the judge in Newfoundland, a lady judge, ruled that you violated the charter. Mm-hmm. And therefore, what you did was wrong, right? And found the people not guilty, right? That they had no right of doing this. Now later they found drugs and whatever in that house or whatever, but they didn't go through the right procedures and they didn't follow the charter. And that judge referenced the charter. Okay, so the charter is very much alive in cases all across the country that people don't know about because the mainstream media are not carrying it.
No,
and it gets a little bit technical, and they ignore and get lazy and don't carry this. Well, this Alberta case is really a good one because it applies directly to the mandates. in Alberta and directly to, and therefore relevant to the whole business of the virus and the vaccine and the mandates and so on. And the judge has ruled this is very, very important case constitutionally. That's what the judge said. The decision is available. Anybody could go into the Alberta Queen's Bench, Court of Queen's Bench, look up recent decisions, and that one will be public, will be there to read. Very short, only 7 or 8 pages, and you can see it all right there in black and white. The mandate being described, the charter being used, and so on. And so it's very much, the problem has been, if I may say so, that there have been 2 major court decisions, both again at the Queen's Bench level in British Columbia and Manitoba, which rule in favor of the government against the charter, if you will, being applicable.
Yeah.
And in one case, they never even referred to the preamble, to the rule of law or the supremacy of God principles as even applying.
That's right.
This is how out of step the judges are. I mean, this judge should be removed in Manitoba who didn't mention that. In the BC case, it was just referenced, but it wasn't used in interpreting and making the decision. Now,
I think we have a case, Brian, where judges are actually calling the preamble, particularly the supremacy of the God portion of it, a dead letter. They've actually annotated it as a dead letter, so that.
But they have no right to do that. They have no power.
If they want to do that, go ahead, and as you say, we have an amending formula. Go, if you want to amend the preamble, go ahead and amend it. But until then,
right now it hasn't been amended, and there it is, and it's part of the charter. And they have not the power, right, or authority to select what in the charter they're going to consider when rendering a judgment in relation to the charter. They have to consider the preamble as well as everything else that's relevant to that case in the charter. So,
sorry, Brian, I think this Alberta case is raising another, this is very, very timely, because at the same moment in time, we have the federal government telling us that because of cabinet confidentiality, they don't have to discuss or release any information on the declaration of the Emergency Act. So will this Alberta decision impact
absolutely
on their ability to do that?
Absolutely it will. Absolutely it will. It'll be very interesting to see whether the government of Alberta tries to appeal this decision by Judge Romaine, because it'll tell you a lot. And this is quite clear. Hey, it's quite clear. All the judge said was, this doesn't violate the principle of cabinet secrecy, where cabinet ministers can talk about a given issue in cabinet that doesn't get released. This has to do with the data, the information. So the judge was very clear in protecting cabinet secrecy where it was to be applicable, and where cabinet secrecy wasn't applicable because it was data that was being released, not the opinion of any minister.
Yeah, then the federal government should have to disclose any information, any data that deals with information they had to declare that foreign money was going into.
Absolutely, and by this is very important, because like we'll see whether it goes to the Court of Appeal in Alberta or not, but it will have applicability right across the nation, because what's at stake is cabinet secrecy and what it means in this particular circumstance, and it's clear and unmistakable to a grade 10 or a grade 9. That when you define what cabinet secrecy is, and when you define what happened here, it wasn't violated. The data that was in cabinet, that was given to the public health officer, should be available in the rendering of this decision concerning the charter. And therefore, there it is. And it's clear to me that this will not be overturned by any court of appeal or by the Supreme Court of Canada. And the governments of Canada, should take note of what happened in Alberta yesterday, because this is going to have far-reaching positive repercussions for you and me in hoping to defend the charter. Now, the other thing I have to say, because people are really disappointed, our court system is very, very slow. Slower than the Americans, as we know, because they've already got a number of decisions out there that we don't have as it relates to Constitution and so on. But those 2 court decisions out of Manitoba and British Columbia, remember, were in the Queen's Bench or the trial division of the Supreme Court of those provinces. It was not the Court of Appeal. The courts of appeal have yet to hear these cases. And so we have to, and then it will go to the Supreme Court of Canada, quite likely. So as I keep saying, the hockey game is not over as it relates to the charter. We may be in the latter part of the second period, but we've got all the third period to go. And the more you and I talk about it and influence and show reasonably that the judges have been wrong so far, the more the higher court judges are going to take a closer look at this than they otherwise would have. So the more we can have, the better.
I certainly hope they take a look at that Manitoba decision. I took a look at that, and I was really, really appalled, actually, when the judge said that he was presented with all kinds of great evidence on why the mandates were a bad idea. Fantastic evidence, and he kind of washed it all away by saying that he had to afford the government a margin of appreciation. Quotes, a margin of appreciation. What the heck does that even mean? He's supposed to judge on the basis of what is presented to him in the court while he's sitting by the bench.
This was a complete dereliction of his responsibilities as a judge. He had no business saying what he said. As we all know, the judge, we're supposed to honor the judges and lawyers and stuff because all they deal with is evidence. Evidence. Well, that was not evidence. And so it was a very dereliction of the judge's duty, and he should be removed in the same way as the judge in the case of Tamara, the leader of the convoy, right? Was a liberal donor, was a liberal donor, and yet she heard this case. And so where was the Chief Justice to stop that judge from hearing that case? And what about the judge herself? Doesn't she have enough common sense to realize that she was in a conflict of interest situation and should have told the Chief Judge, I can't hear this case, Chief Judge, get another judge who's not in the conflict of interest situation. So, you know, just these kinds of things speak to the degradation of our democracy in the last 2 years, like no man's business.
No, this is actually, I'd go on to say, Brian, that we're on a very, very distressing path here. We're walking down the road to despotism here. We're looking at the standing up of two different classes of citizenship. We've got the vaccinated citizens, who by the way should be concerned because pretty soon they're not going to be vaccinated because they're going to miss the third, fourth, fifth, or sixth booster. They're going to be right in the same boat as the unvaccinated. And the other class of citizen is the unvaccinated, who basically has lost all their charter rights to all their fundamental freedoms and rights have been blown away. And that is a very, very scary thing.
Yeah, exactly. And the absolutely deliberate use of Section 1 of the Charter to try to justify what they're doing, when the intent of the Charter, Section 1, was that you could override these rights and freedoms in very dire situations. I was there. I was there. I helped write this stuff. And that was what the intent is. And by the way, judges every day are using in their jurisprudence intent as an important factor in deciding cases. So, and I read some cases where that was true, where the judges used intent. But here they have it right here, the intent. And by the way, go down to Section 4, only 3 sections down from Section 1, and you'll find war, insurrection, and dire situations to be used to justify extending the time of the Parliament if that was necessary, right? So our thought process is right there in the Charter in Section 4. What we were talking about, if the state was in peril, if it was a war, if it was insurrection, that's when you use Section 1, that's when you use Section 4. So it's quite clear, quite clear. And as you know, I go on to argue, even if they wanted to try to apply Section 1, they were very stupid. They didn't demonstrably justify what they were doing. And so therefore it broke the test. They never met the test of demonstrably justified. And by the way, all of the lawyers right across the country who are on the government side try to ignore those words demonstrably justified, and they bring up reasonable limits test. Section 1 talks, no. They don't know their grammar. No, this is justify is a verb. The operative phrase in that whole section is demonstrably justified, not reasonable limits.
And
demonstrably justify within reasonable limits. Not the other way around.
Demonstrate is another verb that they're forgetting about. And here I'm starting to see, Brian, why they don't want to talk to you, why they only give you a form electronic response. They don't want to talk to you because you know what the intent is, and they don't want to let you give you the airtime to tell Canada what the intent of the charter was. And oh, by the way, I was there and I helped write it. They don't want to. Exactly. They don't want to hear you.
And they don't want, because none of them has ever mentioned, nor any of the lawyers even have ever mentioned Section 4, which proves that the concept of dire state of the country or war insurrection was the operative concept in writing that Section 1.
Okay, so we have a situation where there was intent when that charter was put together. There was intent. The preamble was meant to mean something. There was intent there. And we have a situation now where judges, with the support of politicians, I guess, because politicians aren't saying anything, judges have thrown the intent out the window, and they're using something called the living tree. Right. What can be done? You've mentioned that all these judges, they come from the legal environment. They all march to the same drumbeat, I guess. What can be done to break the back of this? It's a revolution, is what it is.
Yeah, no question. It's a revolution without a shot being fired. Listen, I think I don't know, but now at this point, like today, I think more of the probably secretly, more of the courts of appeal judges and the judges of the Supreme Court of Canada are likely listening to you, listening to the Canadian COVID Care Alliance podcasts, listening even perhaps to my interview with Jordan Peterson, which has 1.5 million viewers. I know one of the judges on the Supreme Court. I met him years ago when he was an advisor to John Crosby. He's on the Supreme Court of Canada right now. I know he reads widely. I know he listens widely. And I think, and so one of the advantages for us right now of it taking time to get through the courts is that we have time to educate or inform or apply pressure to those higher judges who have not heard the case yet, and try to show them that their people below them in the provinces who've already ruled on that, right, have made a serious error. And that's what appeal courts are all about, because there may be a mistake made by the lower courts. Otherwise, why have you got an appeal court to start with? Mm-hmm. And so I'm hopeful and optimistic that with discussions like this and many more across the nation, that these appeal court judges are now reading stuff that they never read before. All right. I think there's enough now. Dr. Bridle is out there. Dr. Alexander is out there.
Fantastic mind.
Yeah, fantastic people with data that cannot be ignored.
Yeah.
So I'm hopeful that by the time this travels through these appeal courts, as happened with the judge yesterday, as what happened with the judge in Alberta yesterday, would that judge have ruled the way he did if there wasn't so much talk about the charter in the last several months?
Good point.
Good question. We'll never know the answer to it, but I suspect that judge was influenced by the fact that there's so many people out there now talking about the charter and how our rights have been violated unjustifiably, right?
Yes.
And because it's really interesting what the judge said when you read the decision, right? In order for me, he said, this is an extremely important constitutional decision we have to make here. He actually said that in his court decision, right? And then referenced the charter. This is a very important constitution. Would he have used those words 6 months ago? So we may be onto a bit of a roll here, because that, you know what happens when a decision like that is made? Every law firm in Canada, right, and every court in Canada automatically gets copies of that. I mean, they all have that now, right? Yeah. They all have that. I talked to somebody this morning, and I thought I was going to give them information they didn't have. Oh no, I got that.
Yeah,
I got that. So there is insidiously, if you will, or in our favor, perhaps, because the court process has been slower, an opportunity for all of these rallies, for all of these podcasts to be done, and for some of the more enlightened judges on the appeal courts, hopefully all of them, are now studying not just the government narrative, but the larger science and the larger issue of how could you get to this decision in Manitoba or B, C, without talking about the rule of law, the supremacy of God, and the intent of the legislation.
Yeah, what does that actually mean? What was it intended to mean? And I think you never know, Brian, how you caught me there when you said who knows who's listening to what you're saying now. And
Exactly.
I think that's critically important, because, and I think I like to tell all of our C3RF members that, now is not the time to be quiet. Now is the time. If you have concerns, express them, because it's these concerns that no matter how small they are, they tend to ripple, and they ripple, and they touch people that you would never even think would be in the way of the
exactly.
ripple.
And you know now as well as I know that given that my name is on that lawsuit,
yes,
just by the mere fact of it being on the law, not me as Brian Peckford, but a former first minister who helped, that was there, crafted. All the other first ministers have passed away.
Yep.
Right. And I was there. It was our proposal that broke the impasse to get the agreement on the 5th of November. Yep. Right. This can't, I mean, I know the person who's on the court of the Supreme Court, who I just mentioned that I met years ago. Yeah. Because he was involved with John Crosby. John Crosby was a federal minister from Newfoundland, and we had meetings, of course. And he had his advisors in those meetings. Who was one of those advisors? So you mean to tell me that judge has not now looked at some of the interviews that I have done, over 100, 150 of them so far?
Yes. Of
course.
You're monumental in this battle, Brian, and it's. I tell you, I'm so glad to see that you've picked up the cudgel and have decided to participate. It is absolutely fantastic. Is there anything our C3RF membership can do to help you in your ongoing battle?
Well, of course, the Justice Center for Constitutional Freedoms is an organization which just depends upon donations from individuals. So you could go to the Justice Center for Constitutional Freedoms, look up donations, and right there will be the lawsuit that I'm involved in, and they can contribute directly $5, $2, whatever. They can do it that way, directly, materially, but they can also do it the way you just said. Stay involved, talk to everybody, talk to your MPs, your MLAs, everything counts here. And the more, and go to all the rallies, all the rallies in your area, go to them, because these judges get up every day and they have to have breakfast like the rest of us, and they have to, operate. They're human beings, and therefore they can be influenced in a positive way by what we say in a reasonable and sensible way, like we are doing here today. So stay active, as you said, means a lot in this particular environment, more so than ever before.
Yes. I like to say I have kind of a personal motto I've found comes in pretty handy in it for myself anyway. It's two things: show up, don't quit. Do those two things, and you can't go far wrong.
Exactly. And my father, my late father, had a nickname on me, and he called me Digger.
Oh yeah. I had a couple of fighter pilot friends of mine who had the call sign Digger. And these guys were like badgers. Yeah.
Absolutely. You never give up. I mean, you just keep digging away and you keep asking the questions. And of course, if you look at my history in politics, I mean, that's every day was that. I'm the only first minister in the history of Canada that went to the Supreme Court of Canada 3 times.
Yeah, you must have made a lot of friends there.
Yeah, well, there you go. So, and I mean, in my consulting business, very often for the years I was consulting, my wife and I, from 1989 to 2001, when I was active in consulting, very often when I'd take on a client, and it involved a legal matter as well. And so therefore I had to get hold of the lawyers to find out where it was from their point of view. And if they were on the other side, they would usually, some of the first words they would say, well, we don't want to deal with Peckford, but you know what? Have you got somebody else that we can deal with?
It's just
because
too much
they knew I wasn't going to give up very easily, and I was going to come after them big time. And so I guess that's one reason why I was successful in my consulting business, because you had that reputation going before you. But it was always along the lines of not just irrationally trying to do something, but rationally trying to do something, to
Yeah.
pointing out to them, you have
Mhm.
forgotten this, or you've forgotten that, or you have misinterpreted this, and I want to revisit that whole business and go through that again with you, right, to ensure that what we are both doing here together can stand muster, right? And we got to go through this. And so that's like now, right? And so, as I said to you earlier, our lawsuit will not stop.
No, no, I'm sure it is unstoppable, and it's.
It's totally unstoppable.
I know I think I've just about run you out of time here, Brian. I know you've
Right.
got to go, and I'd like to thank you once again on behalf of all C3RF members, Canadian Citizens for Charter Rights and Freedoms, for your discussion today. It's been really illuminating, and as you've said, this is absolutely historical in precedent.
Absolutely.
Historical. Yeah.
And we have basic rights in a constitution, and
Yeah.
we're going to defend them. And every Canadian has that responsibility now to do that. And by the way, in closing, just let me say, I'm very proud to be part of your organization as an honorary patron when I was contacted by your people, and to be associated with the other people that are honorary patrons there, including David Solway, by the way, who does some wonderful writing.
Great writer.
Some of the best writing in Canada today is done by David Solway. Make no mistake, if anybody who's listening now has not read any of David Solway's book, go ahead and look him up, look up his name. PJ Media in the United States carries a lot of his work. C2C carries a lot of his work. And he's just a tremendous writer of prose and very perceptive about what's going on in his country.
Yeah, talk about a logical mind, really.
Oh, fantastic, yeah.
Well, with that, thanks so much for that, Brian. And I'm going to keep track of what you're up to, and maybe we can get together down the road.
Absolutely, sir. I'm here at your service.
Okay. Well, then we'll say goodbye for now.
Goodbye, sir. Thank you very much.